I think I sort of approach that with anything that I pour my heart into and create is you've done everything you can.
A sudden shift within the royal circle has caused the biggest shock in months, as Prince Harry's presence back at the palace has been quietly confirmed under highly unusual circumstances. His return was carried out in secret, with repercussions already rippling through the family's inner circle and intensifying Meghan's furious reaction, turning the situation into a full-blown power struggle. Long-strained relationships are once again being tested, and every move Harry makes now carries serious consequences, as something compelled him back into palace life and its implications can no longer be ignored. Late one evening, just after 11 p.m., a black Range Rover approached Windsor Castle through a rarely used gate, bypassing standard security after presenting the correct credentials. The vehicle slipped into the shadows of the grounds, and Harry emerged from the back seat dressed in dark clothing with a low-pulled cap, accompanied closely by his personal protection officer. They moved swiftly toward a side entrance typically reserved for senior staff, which opened from the inside before they arrived, suggesting their arrival was expected. Harry then disappeared into the palace's private corridors as the overnight cleaning crew continued their routine through the ancient building. Staff working near the private quarters noticed lights glowing in a room that normally remained dark at that hour, with faint voices carrying through a partially open door. One worker recognized the deeper tone of an older man but could not identify the second voice, noting that the exchange sounded serious rather than casual. Before dawn, another staff member setting up breakfast areas spotted unexpected security officials stationed in normally quiet sections of the castle, with additional protection officers guarding entrances to the private family wings and refusing to explain the heightened measures. As the early morning shift began, staff exchanged puzzled looks and whispered about sightings of a tinted vehicle in the private courtyard and reports of footsteps and voices in the king's study well past midnight. These details began to form a clearer picture when a household manager, during routine checks, discovered fresh coffee cups and used glasses in the king's private sitting room. Items that had not been there the night before, along with security protocols activated in patterns reserved for high-profile family members. By 7 a.m., discreet conversations among trusted staff confirmed that Prince Harry had arrived at Windsor Castle without any public announcement or official schedule, signaling delicate family matters rather than official duties. The realization created a tense, cautious atmosphere as staff carefully avoided sensitive areas, security officers held their positions, and kitchen staff noticed breakfast orders for the king's private dining room included portions for two, with dietary preferences that strongly hinted at Harry's presence within the castle walls. The confirmation of Harry's eating habits provided practical proof that removed any remaining doubt about the identity of the overnight visitor. As the morning continued, Harry remained hidden within the private family quarters, his vehicle still parked in a secured courtyard far from public view, while palace officials made no statements acknowledging his presence despite growing staff awareness. The deliberate secrecy underscored the serious importance of keeping his return concealed, prompting senior staff to quietly consider the implications of such a covert visit, especially given that Harry had not been inside a royal residence in England for many months and had arrived without Meghan or their children. The timing, security measures, and absence of publicity suggested urgent family matters that could not be addressed remotely, creating a tense atmosphere as the discovery spread through whispered conversations rather than open discussion. Within the castle, King Charles met privately with Harry in his study, where a business-like discussion unfolded amid documents detailing royal properties, trusts, and future inheritances, as well as plans for upcoming royal events and the long-term stability of the institution. Charles spoke candidly about modernization, gaps in public duties, his health concerns, and the growing responsibility placed on William and Catherine, while proposing a limited role for Harry that did not require a full return to royal life. Harry raised concerns about media scrutiny and practical arrangements, listening as his father outlined carefully structured plans for gradual public rehabilitation, financial considerations, and asset reviews that still affected him and his children. As Harry learned that decisions made during his absence had influenced his children's future inheritances, the meeting took on new urgency, signaling that his involvement in family matters had become far more significant than he had anticipated. Charles then introduced additional documents related to family estate management, explaining proposed amendments designed to protect Harry's interests while still respecting his decision to live independently, changes that required Harry's careful review and formal consent. It was clear the king had prepared extensively with legal and financial advisors, and Harry took his time reading each page, asking detailed questions about long-term implications, which Charles answered directly without pressure. After hours of working through complex materials, the conversation shifted to more personal matters, with Charles expressing regret over missed family connections and a sincere desire to rebuild relationships and know his grandchildren better, acknowledging mistakes on both sides. Harry shared his own perspective on the pressures and security concerns that had driven him away, and although painful topics were discussed, the exchange remained calm and respectful. Eventually, they returned to practical considerations, outlining future steps, follow-up meetings, and tentative timelines, with Harry insisting on time to reflect and consult Meghan before making commitments, a condition Charles accepted despite noting certain time-sensitive deadlines. The meeting ended around 3 a.m. with a formal handshake that symbolized meaningful progress, even if full resolution remained uncertain. Afterward, Harry moved through Windsor Castle with unusual purpose, heading toward rarely used, historically significant rooms tied to his childhood rather than official royal functions. Staff observe him entering closed and dust-covered spaces filled with old furniture, photographs, and memories, quietly tracing surfaces and lingering as if searching for something emotional rather than physical. His movement seemed guided by memory instead of logic, passing through libraries and service corridors unnoticed except by discreet security monitoring, creating an impression of reflection and inner conflict as he navigated the private legacy of his family. Harry's movement through functional spaces broke the normal patterns of royal routine as he paused at doorways and staircases that offered behind-the-scenes access to formal rooms, viewing familiar areas from perspectives usually reserved for staff. He appeared to be rebuilding a mental map of the palace, studying it from multiple viewpoints, and was later encountered by a maintenance worker on an upper floor long out of use, where he examined portraits of ancestors spanning generations with careful attention to names and faces, as if deliberately reflecting on heritage and lineage. Administrative staff then observed him entering the royal archives, requesting specific documents related to family history, protocol, status, titles, and inheritance, spending over an hour reviewing materials and making notes in a personal journal. His unusual combination of revisiting childhood spaces, navigating service corridors, studying ancestral portraits, and researching historical records prompted whispered speculation among palace workers, who sensed they were witnessing something significant. Harry also spent nearly half an hour alone in the private chapel, a quiet space for intimate family ceremonies, adding a spiritual dimension to what felt like a personal pilgrimage through the palace. Security logs later showed that in a single morning he accessed more areas of Windsor Castle than most family members would enter over months, underscoring the depth and intent of his comprehensive exploration. Harry's actions suggested either a quiet farewell or a tentative return to belonging, with the meaning dependent on conversations still unfolding behind closed doors. Staff in the private residential areas noticed him pausing outside rooms occupied by other family members, standing silently without knocking, as if weighing whether to reach out, moments that revealed the inner conflict between his purpose for visiting and the strained relationships that made some encounters impossible. A senior household manager gathered these observations into a confidential report for officials overseeing security and family affairs, as the palace carefully tracked deviations from normal patterns even when no rules were broken. As the morning progressed, Harry eventually returned to the residential wing where he was staying, leaving staff to resume their duties while reflecting on a man caught between identities, searching for connection to the history and spaces that shaped him despite living apart from them. Meanwhile, Prince William arrived at his Kensington Palace office shortly after 8 a.m. and immediately sensed trouble when his private secretary delivered the news that Harry had been secretly staying at Windsor Castle since the previous night, a visit arranged entirely by King Charles with almost no one informed. William reacted with visible anger, questioning why he had been excluded and quickly demanding an urgent meeting with his father. Within half an hour, he set off for Windsor, the drive passing in tense silence as he considered the implications of yet another private negotiation involving his brother. Upon arrival, William moved swiftly through the castle and entered his father's study without knocking, confronting Charles over the secrecy. The king explained that he wanted space for a private, practical discussion with Harry, free from sibling tension, but William argued that such secrecy undermined trust, stability, and unified leadership. The exchange grew heated, exposing deep disagreements over how to manage Harry's role and the balance between personal family bonds and institutional responsibility, with years of unresolved frustration surfacing before both men finally lowered their voices in an attempt to regain control of the conversation. Charles continued the discussion by outlining the specific legal and financial matters he had addressed with Harry, emphasizing that these issues required attention regardless of personal tensions. William accepted the practical necessity but made it clear that he expected to be included in all future conversations affecting the monarchy's future and would not tolerate being kept in the dark again. Although Charles defended his handling of the situation as appropriate given its sensitivity, he agreed to improve communication going forward and assured William that nothing discussed with Harry threatened his position or Catherine's role, as the focus was on workable arrangements rather than forced reconciliation. When William learned that Harry was still staying in the castle, he insisted on speaking with him directly, and after some hesitation, Charles agreed, urging his elder son to approach the encounter calmly. William left the study with cold determination, intent on understanding Harry's intentions and ensuring that any renewed engagement with the family would protect the institution. Across the Atlantic, Meghan woke in her Montecito bedroom to sunlight and a phone filled with missed notifications, her shock intensifying as she read headlines confirming Harry's secret return to Windsor Castle. She quickly scanned multiple reports describing an unannounced late-night meeting with King Charles, noting with growing alarm that none mentioned her presence. Meghan repeatedly called and texted Harry, receiving only voicemail and silence, which felt deliberate rather than accidental. As panic and anger set in, she paced the room, replaying their recent conversations and realizing that his vague references to business matters now carried a far more troubling meaning. Each unanswered call and new alert deepened her distress, especially as media coverage began framing her absence as significant. Unable to contain her anxiety, Meghan reached out to her closest friend and advisor, urgently explaining the situation as they tried to make sense of Harry's secret trip and the implications it might carry as they discussed possible motivations. Meghan continued checking her phone for any response from Harry, but the conversation brought little comfort. She opened her laptop and searched for every available detail about his movements, finding no flight records or travel information to indicate when he had left California, which suggested the planning had taken place days earlier without her knowledge. Meghan replayed recent interactions in her mind, realizing that while Harry had seemed distracted, he had not appeared openly deceptive, making the extent of his secrecy feel like a physical blow. She briefly considered contacting palace officials directly but dismissed the idea, knowing it would appear desperate and almost certainly leak to the press, given her strained relationship with King Charles. Fighting the urge to act, she ignored messages from friends and associates asking for comment and repeatedly drafted, then deleted, texts to Harry that swung between anger and forced calm. Her sense of betrayal competed with growing concern about what decisions he might be making without her input. Just after 9 a.m. California time, her phone finally rang with Harry's name on the screen, and she answered immediately, only to hear a tired, strained voice offering a rushed apology. Harry claimed the meeting had been urgent and conducted under strict secrecy at his father's insistence, but Meghan challenged him, questioning why he had not trusted her enough to be honest. When Harry admitted he had known about the trip for several days and had chosen not to tell her to avoid conflict, Meghan felt her anger harden, and she pressed him for details about what had actually been discussed. Harry insisted that no firm commitments or agreements had been made during the meeting and that everything remained subject to further discussion, but Meghan made it clear they needed to speak face to face as soon as possible. When Harry mentioned he still had a difficult conversation ahead with William, Meghan cut him off, insisting that whatever family drama awaited him could wait until after he spoke properly with his wife. Her tone allowed no room for argument, and Harry agreed to call back within a few hours to arrange a video conversation. When the call ended, Meghan stood alone in her bedroom, her phone feeling like evidence of betrayal as she looked around the carefully curated life they had built away from royal control, realizing that Harry's secret return to Windsor Castle threatened the independence they shared and bracing herself for a confrontation that could define their future. Meanwhile, William moved through the quiet corridors leading to the guest quarters at Windsor Castle, his footsteps echoing against stone walls. Steeped in centuries of family conflict as ancestral portraits seemed to watch him pass. With his protection officer trailing at a discreet distance, William approached the door where Harry was staying and knocked firmly. Harry answered in casual clothes, visibly tired and surprised, and after a long, uncomfortable silence, allowed William inside. The guest suite looked temporary and unsettled, with unpacked bags, scattered documents, and empty cups, reinforcing the sense of an unplanned stay. William remained standing as Harry closed the door, stopping his brother from speaking as he demanded to know what Harry thought he was doing after leaving royal life so publicly and critically. Harry defended himself by explaining that their father had summoned him and arranged everything, insisting he had every right to meet privately with the king, though his defensive tone betrayed uncertainty. William countered that nothing involving Harry could truly remain private, pointing out that the visit had already leaked to the press, staff were aware, and palace officials were now scrambling to manage the narrative. Harry's presence had created immediate complications, affecting everyone in the family, and his belief that he could move in and out of Windsor unnoticed revealed either remarkable naivety or a deliberate disregard for the consequences. He argued that William had no authority to dictate his interactions with other family members and expressed frustration at being treated as if he needed permission to engage in family matters. Harry reminded William that years of being excluded from important conversations and decisions had left him no choice but to seek his own path back to communication with their father. William's anger flared at this characterization. He reminded Harry that he had chosen to leave the royal fold in a highly public and destructive manner, causing the family widespread humiliation. Catherine had endured harsh criticism fueled by information Harry provided to the press, and the institution had faced intense scrutiny during a sensitive transitional period. William insisted that these consequences were the direct result of Harry's choices. Harry countered that William had never attempted to understand his perspective or the pressures that drove him away, accusing his older brother of prioritizing the institution over the welfare of family members. He pointed out that William had stood by while palace officials briefed negatively about Meghan, taking protective action only after Harry had made the decision to leave. William pressed Harry to explain the purpose of this secret visit. He genuinely believed he could negotiate some sort of hybrid arrangement in which he remained independent while re-engaging with family affairs. Harry maintained that he had no intention of returning to royal duties or relocating to England, insisting that his meeting with Charles had focused solely on specific legal and financial matters that required attention regardless of where he lived. He reminded William that he still had rights and interests as a son of the king, and that convenience or inconvenience could not erase his place in the family structure. William argued that Harry could not expect to retain privileges while living an independent life in California, accusing him of trying to have it both ways. Harry countered that William had long resented sharing attention or importance, and the argument quickly devolved into childhood grievances and long-buried resentments. Eventually, William stopped and, taking a deep breath, stated coldly that Harry needed to make a clear choice. Either fully commit to the working royal family with all its duties and restrictions or accept being permanently outside the institution. There could be no middle ground that allowed Harry to enjoy independence while maintaining privileges, and William refused to tolerate any further undermining of the monarchy's stability. Harry responded firmly that William had no right to issue ultimatums, insisting that their father, as king, would determine family structure, and that he would continue his relationship with Charles regardless of William's approval. The cold finality in his tone made it clear the conversation was over. William stared at him, recognizing the familiar stubborn expression that meant Harry would not bend, and left without another word. Meanwhile, back in California, Harry sat in a plain room at Windsor Castle preparing the promised video call. After several rings, the connection was established, revealing Harry's exhausted and drawn face on Meghan's laptop screen. Meghan, seated in her Montecito home office, controlled her expression but radiated barely contained fury. Harry began with another apology, explaining that he had been caught in back-to-back difficult conversations all day. First with their father, which had lasted far longer than expected, and then an unexpected confrontation with William. The situation had spiraled beyond anything Harry had anticipated when he agreed to make the trip, and his voice carried a pleading quality, signaling both stress and a hope for understanding. Meghan let him finish before responding, keeping her tone carefully measured as she demanded clarity about the timeline of events. She asked when Harry had first learned about the meeting with King Charles. Harry admitted that initial contact had come nearly 2 weeks earlier, when a private secretary requested that he return to England for urgent family business. He had agreed to the trip but was sworn to absolute secrecy regarding timing and purpose. Meghan's composure faltered as she repeated the revelation in disbelief. 2 weeks. Harry had known about this trip for 2 weeks and had told no one, even his wife. Harry tried to justify his silence, explaining that the king had insisted on strict confidentiality to ensure the meeting could proceed privately. Meghan interrupted, asserting that she was not outside interference but Harry's partner in every decision affecting their family. Keeping the trip secret from her, she argued, was a fundamental breach of trust and the promise they had made to operate as a unified team regarding royal matters. Harry insisted the secrecy had been necessary, claiming that if Meghan had known in advance, she might have objected and complicated the situation. Meghan's anger flared. She pointed out that the very conflict they were now experiencing was a direct result of his deception, and that his assumption she would oppose the trip revealed his real problem. He had knowingly excluded her to avoid having an honest conversation. Harry attempted to redirect the discussion to the practical outcomes of his meetings. He stressed that legal documents required his signature, estate planning for their children had been discussed, and financial arrangements impacting their long-term security were reviewed. Matters he argued could not be postponed or handled remotely. Meghan demanded to know exactly what agreements had been made and whether he had signed anything committing them to obligations. Harry admitted to signing some documents but insisted they were procedural and did not alter their current lifestyle or impose royal duties. Meghan pressed him to send copies immediately. Harry promised to do so but claimed digital copies were not yet available. The conversation shifted to King Charles's intentions. Meghan suspected the meeting had been designed to emotionally manipulate Harry while isolating him from her perspective, leveraging guilt over family separation and duty. Harry maintained that his father had been reasonable and straightforward, presenting practical problems that required solutions without coercion. His defense of Charles only heightened Meghan's suspicion that emotional pressure had already influenced him. Meghan then asked about the confrontation with William. Harry recounted the angry exchange, including William's ultimatum that he must choose between fully rejoining royal life or remaining permanently outside the institution. Meghan seized on William's reaction as proof of exactly why secret meetings were dangerous. She argued that Harry had walked into a situation where family members could corner him and pressure him into decisions without any support. Harry grew defensive, insisting that no one had forced him and that he was fully capable of making his own choices. Meghan's suggestion that he could be easily manipulated felt insulting to him. He had already spent the day navigating difficult conversations without yielding to anyone's demands. Meghan responded sharply that Harry's actions spoke louder than his protests. By keeping the trip secret, meeting with his father alone, and signing documents without legal review, he had demonstrated the very vulnerability she had warned about. Harry's desire to maintain relationships with family members who had caused harm made him susceptible to influence. He accused Meghan of trying to isolate him completely from his family, arguing that it was neither healthy nor what he wanted. Harry emphasized his need to balance his marriage and family connections, but Meghan countered that he had created this crisis through dishonesty. She insisted that she had only required transparency and partnership in decisions affecting both of them, and that he had failed that simple test. The accusation hung heavily between them. Harry appeared stricken as he realized how deeply Meghan felt hurt. He attempted to reassure her that she and their children came first, but Meghan cut him off, saying she needed time to think without his explanations or excuses. The call ended abruptly when she closed her laptop, leaving Harry unable to respond. The situation raised difficult questions about Harry's future relationship with the royal family. Could he maintain meaningful connections with his father and brother while living permanently in California? Would Meghan ever accept an arrangement involving regular contact with Windsor Castle? How would Charles balance his roles as father and king when those responsibilities conflicted? Answers remained uncertain as each party retreated to process the events of the night. The secret return to Windsor Castle had solved nothing and instead exposed tensions that had previously been managed privately. Harry faced consequences for his dishonesty with Meghan. William confronted the challenges of a brother unwilling to choose a clear path, and Charles faced the possibility that his son's relationships might be permanently strained despite his efforts. The repercussions of one night's meetings would be felt for months to come. As for whether Harry was supposed to attend the meeting in the first place, that remains open to interpretation and intersection of duty, secrecy, and personal choice that only he and the king could navigate.